the Season 9 Advanced Guide to Thor. So at first we're going to do a breakdown of Thor's kit, and then we're going to look at some of the combos and animation cancels and tips, and at the very end we're then going to look at some playstyles for Thor. So with a breakdown of Thor's kit, Thor is a slightly fragile tank who, even though he can take on any duel and win, now with the Hela team up, is very fragile with only 600 HP. He has the second fastest movement speed at 6.5 meters per second, when Wolverine's at 7, and everyone else's base movement speed's at 6. This makes him faster than like 95% of the cast, because there's like 52 heroes in the game. The only reason why Thor doesn't kind of fall over when you compare him to other tanks, even though he doesn't have a shield, which is quite important, quite a big thing, is the fact that he's able to build overhealth. And because you're able to build overhealth through the use of certain abilities, it allows you to kind of mitigate incoming damage, and your health pool kind of increases throughout the fight rather than it kind of staying stationary at around 600. And Thor is a very big threat, so you do need to pay attention to him if you're not going to play him, but he can easily be dismantled through the correct play style, well, through correct play styles, because you can play Thor very different ways. And if you're playing multiple tough matchups for Thor, it can be too much for him. So, you know, first of all, now we're going to dig into his actual kit rather than what there actually is. So we have Thor Force, which is his passive. You can only have 3 Thor Force at one time. It has a slow recovery speed of 5 seconds per Thor Force. After using an ability that uses Thor Force, you get a 5 seconds to get it back with a melee. So that means that you use an ability that uses Thor Force, like your like Awakening Rune or like Awakening. You use it, and then you come out of Awakening. Then if you get a melee within 5 seconds there, you recharge 1 Thor Force. And it's typically shown by your hammer being light blue. And on top of that, it doesn't need to be against an actual player that you hit. It works against an Emma shield, a Loki clone, and a more squid even, as well as Envy's shield. That's quite useful for Thor Force. Mjolnir Bash, which is the primary fire, does 45 damage, has a range of 4 meters. Hammer Throw does 50 damage on hit and 25 damage on return, which means you can kind of hit enemies through walls, depends how you do it properly. You get 75 bonus health if you hit a player, and on top of that, it also gives you 1 Thor Force back upon hitting an enemy. And it does not consume Thor Force. Storm Surge, which is his dash, has a range of 6 to 3 meters if you hit a person, depends on how much you charge it, or 10 to 12 meters without a person, depends on how much you charge it. It gives 50 bonus health after use, regardless whether you get someone or not, because it uses Thor Force, and the damage on how much it does varies. 40 damage at minimum charge, and 60 damage at max. You also then are able to get the Thor Force back if you hit a melee within the 5 seconds after using the ability. Awakening Rune lasts 5 seconds, each projectile does 70 damage, with 5 meters of AoE damage. So, what this here is, the AoE damage does like 15 damage per tick, or per second rather. I call it ticks because, I don't know, Minecraft brain. But essentially, if someone's in your AoE, you do 15 damage every second, but rather than it only triggering 5 times, it triggers 6 times, which means you can do 90 damage just by someone being within 5 meters of you, as long as they're kind of like in your model's kind of LOS. It's kind of like a sphere in that way. Which means that you can, like, if you're in someone's face with Awakening for the whole time, you can do 790 damage because of that extra 15 damage that builds up over time. You can shoot 10 projectiles over 5 seconds, which means you can kill 90% of the cast without them using abilities, because the only ones that survive are the 850 HP heroes, which is only Dino and Groot, and then, obviously, you can cancel Awakening anytime you want after using it. Lightning Realm is a 5-meter sphere that does 40 damage to enemies if they leave it. It grounds enemies, and it applies a 30% slow on enemies who leave it too. So if the enemy leaves it, they get grounded, they get a 30% slow, as well as they take 40 damage, which is quite nice. Would be far better if they made it a shield though, but that's That's something for another day. And it does replenish Thor Force, like 1 Thor Force for each enemy that's actually in there, with it capping out at maximum being of 3 Thor Force. But that's only because that's as much as you can hold. It doesn't go over. And your Lightning Realm has a actual duration of how long it's up for is 4 seconds. And it's got a 12-second cooldown. Your ultimate, God of Beget, sorry, God of Thunder, you know. Mind bad. Your ultimate lasts for around 3 seconds in total, from beginning to the end. That is like from the second you cast it to the second you slam down. That's a long time, so unless you have like around 400 HP, I wouldn't really recommend it. Or unless you have the Hela team up, then you can kind of go for it regardless. Because otherwise you will probably die while casting it, because in that state you are quite fragile to hit scan, or really to anyone. Like you know, 600 HP is quite a lot, but unless you're actively being healed throughout it, you will die fairly quickly. Your ultimate is somewhat similar in Awakening in some ways. So it does also AoE damage, but unlike Awakening where you shoot or anything in that, it does tick damage of 40 damage per tick, and this tick happens every half second, and it has an 8-meter radius from the ground on where you are over. So you're above the ground on it, and it has 8 meters kind of down, kind of like cylinder. And it does 40 damage kind of per tick, as long as that's in there, which is every 0.5 seconds. It does 200 damage in total, because it goes 5 times. And your slam, you slam down and you do 220 damage with your ultimate. Your speed does not change while you're in your ultimate, so it stays the same, but it does decrease if you go up or down with your ultimate, which is something that you do need to be careful of. It's why you never want to be going up or down with your ultimate. Because I guarantee you the second you start going up or down with your ultimate, that's the second you're going to lose all the enemies, and that's the second they're all going to run away from you. Because you become really slow. And you're also really easy to hit too. So next we're moving on to combos, animation cancelling, and tips. So as Thor, if you look at the base kit, your damage potential is not exceedingly high, especially when you compare it to someone like Punisher, or Hela, or Namor, or Gamma Squids now. However, you are able to outdamage multiple of these high damage heroes if you use Thor's kit correctly, and you are able to kill, well, all of them. One animation cancelling is you can cancel your melee with your hammer throw, and this is a quick burst which, if you've just come off your Storm Surge and you come into that melee cancel with hammer throw, you can go from 1 Thor Force all the way up to 2. So it's quite big. So if you have two Thor Force, and then you use a Storm Surge to get into a target, and then you melee hammer throw, and like you need to melee first and then hammer throw instantly, and that is an animation cancel for your melee, and that basically means you instantly kind of do 95 damage. You get the plus 75 HP of the hammer throw because you hit the target. Probably almost killed the target at that point. Like down to like 150 HP. You just hit Awakening real quick. Awakening, you hit 2 shots, and they're probably dead. Because the Awakening's AoE damage helps too. And then another combo is your Lightning Run with your ultimate. This is very useful because it slows the enemies down while you're ulting, which you kind of need because otherwise there's a chance they can run away or escape through it. Another tip with your ultimate is that you do have a 1-hit KO combo with it, and this basically just means that you need to combo it with a rocket amplifier, damage amplifier, or a lunar damage boost, and that allows you to get a 1-hit KO against supports in their ults, no matter what happens, basically. The only exceptions are Mantis and Rocket, because you just don't do enough damage against them, but that's purely because they've got too much kind of... They give it a bonus health, that's why they survive. But all the other supports you kill, you can almost kill Jeff through his ult naturally, to be fair. So you are quite lethal with your ultimate if you do the right damage combos. In Storm Surge, you have free movement, which means you can go in any single direction you want, which means you can kidnap people. It also means you can knock people off the map quite easily too. So if on certain maps, like Eternal Midnight, you can kind of push people off the map at the very end, and if you have ultimate, you can then use ultimate again, and then ult onto point, and then you kind of probably get another kill too there. Another tip is pick the Hela team up. I don't think this really needs to be said, but it allows Thor to play so much more aggressively, and it also allows Thor to win so many more team fights than he otherwise would not be able to, because effectively it gives you a second life. And on top of that, you can kind of extend its duration if you use Awakening, Hammer Throw, and then maybe a Storm Surge too. Like, your life just increases. And, like, it does go down, but you should be able to get a kill like 90% of the time, unless your position is actually horrible. And in that case, you just kind of accept death pretty quickly. As Thor, you are Angela's biggest counter. This obviously means if you've seen Angela and you play Thor, you're going to have a field day, because you're able to ground Angela and prevent her from leaving the teamfight with Lightning Realm, as well as Awakening Rune, which is really good at bursting down HP, because the shield goes very, very quickly. And on top of that, if you just give comms to your team, she's gone. Like, really fast. And Thor excels at isolated duels, so if you see someone on their own, you should be able to beat them on a 1v1 relatively easily, especially with the Hela team up. Makes 1v1s Thor's best element now. You know, he's basically undefeatable in a 1v1, unless you make a serious mistake. When you ult as Thor, it can be a good idea to ult underneath the doorway, because that way, if they go into a room, like if there's a room available, they can't run into the room. Because if they run into the room, you can still follow them, and of course you don't want to descend naturally with your Thor ult, because that slows you down so much. And then we have moving on to playstyles. So with playstyles, there's mainly 3 playstyles for Thor. You've got your playstyles of dueling / contesters, you've got your kidnapper / displacer, or your bait Thor, or, you know, mock dive. So, starting for duels / contesters, this playstyle for Thor, you're kind of looking for enemy DPSs or supports who are out of position, who are, you know, taking an angle which is too aggressive or something, or place where they can't get healed by the other support, or something along those lines. And essentially, you want to Storm Surge up to them, and then challenge them on height. You beat them off height, and then you can either stay on height there and use Awakening to just keep on applying pressure onto their team, or you then kind of just like hold height, and you know, you can kind of take a break until Thor Force comes back, or depends on how aggressive your team is going in, you can then join in on the team too, so you can just kind of chase them, depends on what your team's doing. But that does require you to be very aware on what your team is doing, whether you actually dive in, or if you're diving in as trolling. It's a fine line. And then we have the kidnapping / displacements playstyle. In this case here, you're sitting mostly in the front line, and you're trying to kidnap the enemy tanks to pull them out of position. And this is basically, it's quite self-explanatory. You just, you know, it's high risk, but also high reward. Because if you pull one of their tanks out of the fight and they just get bursted by your team, it's automatically kind of a 5v6, or they waste a crucial cooldown, like Rocket Raz or Adam Warlock Raz. Either way, it's not looking good for them here. The only tanks it doesn't really work on is maybe Dino and Thing, but that's only because they're immovable. And the reason why it's not very sustainable is because obviously Thor is not kind of built to be frontlining. Like, your health pool is quite limited, quite low, so you can't sustain that high pressure in the front line for too long. Especially if they're playing like high damage characters in the back, like a Phoenix, a Hela, maybe even a Squirrel Girl, maybe, but if they're playing Squirrel Girl, you can probably die Squirrel Girl, or a Punisher. Like, if they're playing like a lot of that kind of stuff, then it's tough and it's challenging. And that way the kidnapper / displacement Thor just doesn't really work. And then finally we have bait Thor. This playstyle is arguably the worst one of the 3. It still can work, but it is generally like the worst. And this is a conclusion that like not only I've reached, okay? I've reached this conclusion alongside some other streamers who play Thor too. And this playstyle is essentially, you're playing Thor, you're trying to bait a DPS or a support into trying to 1v1 you, and essentially you're kind of hoping that you win the 1v1 against the support or DPS, and you're hoping that it doesn't become a 2v1, because if then you're probably gonna die, or if it's a 3v1, it's just over. And essentially you're kind of hoping that one of them just kind of makes a mistake and tries to fight you. which at higher ranks is going to happen less often because people kind of know just how strong Thor is and what he kind of does. So they're going to try to avoid that at all costs. However, ultimately, Thor is an extremely versatile hero who can do so many things, but he is not the best at anything, well, except duels. And unfortunately, Rivals is a team game, not a 1v1. And because it's not a 1v1 game, Thor will probably never be the best tank, and he is almost certainly never going to be the best hero. But that does not mean that you cannot play Thor into basically any circumstance, because you can play Thor into any team comp, any meta. Almost every single season, Thor has been, if not good, he's been, well, if not viable, then he's been good. There has been some rough patches where it's been more difficult to play, but essentially through the playstyles that Thor now has, you can almost always play him into almost any meta, almost any time against basically any team comp, and you should be doing relatively well. If you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe, and yeah, I'll be live on Twitch later. The bonus tip at the end is you can charge your Storm Surge in spawn without there being a movement penalty, which is very useful because it means that you can move slightly quicker and get to point ever so slightly quicker at the very beginning. And the movement penalty applied by Storm Surge, which I did kind of forget to mention earlier, that only applies the second you leave spawn. So while you're in spawn, you can start charging it and there's no penalty. The second you leave spawn, there is a penalty for charging it. Just what you should know. And peace. I can give you my signature if you like me so much. Oh, the ego. The ego's immense. Ah.